Wallace did a great job of introducing us, but just a little more information about us. I'm Heather, and like Wallace indicated, Natalie and Amber and I met at Texas Tech during our doctoral studies, so not terribly long ago, but a while now. And we've had the privilege of staying in contact and learning together. And recently we worked on a book project together, and Natalie's chapter will be part of the focus of our presentation today. And it's really what brings the three of us together as a voice for what we see as a place we just need to do better, all of us. And so my background is I taught English forever, and I've been in teacher ed for 4 years, and I live in California.
And once again, I'm Natalie. I have been teaching math for 13 years. I've had the privilege of teaching middle school, high school, and now I teach adults. And I am a graduate of a historically Black college, University, North Carolina A&T State University. And with my sisters here, I attended a predominantly white institution. I currently live in the state of Arizona.
And I'm Amber. I have spent the last 15 years in education. For 7 years, I worked as a high school teacher in rural Texas. So in those sorts of areas, you teach everything. So I was an English language arts, history, and theater arts teacher over those 7 years. For the last 8 years, I have been in the higher education system. Part of that time was in a department of English, as my master's is in English. But for the last 3 years, I've been living out my dream as a teacher educator and doing all of those things while living in Texas.
So we come to you today from the perspective of our book, Hear My Voice, Tales of Trauma and Equity from Today's Youth. So the main thrust of this book is to make educators and others cognizant of the persons who may sit in seats before them. Whomever you're speaking to, that person has a background, that person has a history, that person is coming from some perspective, and being sensitive to that and recognizing the influence and the impact of that background could make a tremendous difference in how you reach that student or whomever it is you're trying to reach. So we have chapters in there based on maybe a student who has experienced homelessness and other challenges that a person might face. But one chapter in particular that's relevant to what we're talking about today is chapter 6, Place-Based Race. And so we're going to discuss this from our own experiences, obviously, and our collective experiences. So we thank you so much again for taking this journey with us.
So if you saw the video where we advertised and hoped that you guys would come join us for today, this quote was shared. I'm only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. And what we want to make clear before we start is that we are just three people facilitating a conversation that we think is really important in any education system. We aren't coming to you as experts, as know-alls. What we want to do is just facilitate a conversation, and we're really glad to have that opportunity to do so, because we're also coming to you as moms, as teachers, and as humans and part of the society, and we want to do something.
Okay, so when we have worked on this webinar, we really set it around 3 objectives, and each of us is going to be responsible for one. So today I have the privilege to walk us through the objective of becoming better listeners. And our objective around that is just to create an inviting space for dialogue about race and education. I think it's a topic that is raw and we feel vulnerable in, but we as facilitators agree none of us are going to move in this journey if we don't have places where we can talk this through and learn new things.
And my role today is to journey you through acknowledgement, to highlight threats to racial tranquility. And those threats can come from a variety of different sources, a variety of different people groups, and respecting context and intent regarding that acknowledgement.
And then last, I'm going to walk us through some action steps that we've taken and some that we might suggest just to engage and encourage us towards our own individual growth and knowledge.
Okay, so we're going to get started with our first objective, which is listen. And I'm going to start by just sharing this quote by Larry King that I like. I remind myself every morning, nothing I say this day will teach me anything. So if I'm going to learn, I must do it by listening. And wouldn't that be a great starting point for many of us, for all of us probably, to learn how to listen better? And I think we have to begin to frame listening as a very active step and a great place to begin, but also to spiral back to over and over again as we deal with difficult topics. So this is a TED Talk that I'm not going to share right now. It would just take too long. It's 11 minutes, but I think it's well worth your time, and I would really encourage you to watch it later. It's titled 10 Ways to Have Better Conversations, and the speaker starts out by really discussing how we live in a polarizing time in history, and that due to that, none of us are very good at compromising. And so she's really promoting the idea that we have to consider ways to be better at having good conversations. And so one of the action steps within this objective that I have is, what if we each listened and chose one of the 10 ways that we could be a better listener, and just consider how that might move us forward when we're talking about difficult times in the United States history and the world and our communities as well. Okay, and part of listening to me, I think sometimes we just have to actually realize that as people, we all have biases, we all have preferences. That's just how we've been created. It's how we come to this world with the experiences we have. And so I've split this clip into 2 parts. So you're going to see an intro, and then we're going to skip to the end in the next slide. So as we begin to watch this in just a second, what I want you to think about is, if you've done what I'm hopeful that most of us can relate to, even if there's a little shame around it. If you've ever met somebody and early on just decided you didn't like them, I hope I'm not alone on that. And then we'll watch the end. So go ahead, Ryan, and play this clip, please. The very first clip shows her drawing, and it's terrible. It's not better than I can do, and she starts getting buzzed out of the show. And so if you think about that, we sometimes have this ability to judge before we see the final outcome. And so I think we just have to have an understanding that as people, this is something we can do, and we need to work against it. In my teacher education classes, one of the things I try to do is, sometimes I'll show this film and I'll talk about, as they begin to go into the school system, that we can hear terrible things about kids in the staff rooms, or we can read their files and hear their discipline, or see a neighborhood, and we can draw conclusions that may not be fair about these children that are coming into our classroom, and that we have to suspend judgment and give these children a fighting chance. And I think we need to expand that, more so into our schools and our communities and our world, so that we can have a better tomorrow than we're having today when we watch the news. Okay, so another aspect, I think, when we're trying to be better listeners, is we need to listen with understanding and empathy rather than to respond. And for me, the type of learner I am, a lot of times we're exposed to a lot of large numbers, like big statistics and percentages. And for me, I think when I watch the news, I become numb to that, and it doesn't really sink in and make a difference in how I relate to these difficult topics. But for me, when I hear a personal story, it will really break through to my heart and make me want to do more to make a difference in our world, with the kids that I work with the adults I work with. And so because of that, I want to go ahead and ask Ryan to click to the transition. And I'm going to share a quote. And this is from the narrative within Natalie's chapter about a student that experienced racism. And so the narrative starts out, "The first racist encounter I recall happened to me in elementary school, in kindergarten. A classmate and I were arguing over a ball, pulling it back and forth, each wanting it for ourselves. Our teacher approached us, two small kids about the same height, looking up at the leader, pleading our individual cases. Before long, the teacher reflexively smacked me in the mouth. She regretted it immediately as I could see it in her face. Her eyes opened widely and she covered her mouth with both hands. So for me as a mom of 3 kids, when you send them off to school, you want those teachers to love those kids like you love your own kids. And so I think when we think about individuals going into the classroom, we know we want to be, I think many of us here today are educators. We want them to be loved because we know that makes a difference. And I think we have to think about the impact on the individual as well as the larger community. All right, and I think this is a tough one for all of us. We're learning how to aim for dialogue and not debate. And later, if you look through this presentation and in the notes section, you'll see a link that many of the points I'm about to make come from this document. So for dialogue, if we're aiming for dialogue and we don't want to debate, we're going to assume that a lot of people can contribute to the answer, that we don't hold the answer and we need other people. You can click again, please. Also, dialogue is collaborative. We work as a team to make things better. Go ahead, Ryan. And it's going to explore the common good. And finally, the last point is that it admits other thinking can improve my own. And so I think we just need to take the time to realize that we need a community of people that are going to help us learn and that we will take the time to allow that learning to take place. The final suggestion I'm going to make is that once we have done these other steps, that we really take some time to reflect. Go ahead and put the quote up. You can see that I was an English teacher. I just love quotes. This is a quote by Mark Twain. It says, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. And one of the things I'm learning during this time is that as a lot of information comes in, whether it's the news or articles or books I'm reading or conversations with people in my life, that I need to just take some time to process it, to kind of turn it over and to think about it. And I think we have to allow the idea that a lot of the information we get will have other people's bias connected to it too. So we have to take this time to critical think and find the truth so that we can keep moving forward to be better people. And then we're going to move into my friend Natalie's section.
Okay, Heather, thank you so much. I appreciate that section on listen, and I hope that everyone here appreciates that. Listen goes for, as you can probably see by now, I am a Black female, and I am also charged with the responsibility of listening as well. So thank you again, Heather. I appreciate those points. And let's talk about acknowledgement. Again, from my perspective, what is it that maybe I would hope that the community at large might acknowledge? So one of the things I love is that race, really, we have one, and that's the human race. And fortunately, we have differences that we can celebrate. So I celebrate that when my sister takes her hair, for example, on the left side out of the ponytail holder, it falls down. When I take my hair out of the ponytail holder, for example, it falls up. That's quite fun and celebratory, I would say. Another thing about race on the surface, if we're talking about race in terms of being Black or being Hispanic or being white, I would argue that we can make a change if we please. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Rachel Dolezal, but she lives her life as a Black woman. She served as president of a chapter of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Black Colored People. And she continues to live her life as a Black female. And so I think you'll discover here in this short video clip that she's actually a white female born to white parents. Ryan, you can go ahead and turn that video on.
After years of passing for Black, Rachel Dolezal's truth was very suddenly exposed in 2015. Living in obscurity in Spokane, Washington, the head of the local chapter of the NAACP was forced to resign after her story was unraveled by a local news reporter who asked her point blank, "Are you African American?" Dolezal didn't have an answer. She infamously left the frame, caught off guard. In the media frenzy that followed, Dolezal admitted that while she was born to Caucasian parents, she identified as a Black woman. In her new memoir,
it was made right there that Rachel Dolezal is born to white parents, and she, so race sort of breaks down in that sense. Also, critical race theory is addressed in the book's chapter, where white privilege is actually acknowledged as a real actionable thing, if you will. White privilege is an unnatural, social, and I emphasize construct, established and maintained by its benefactors. So this is debatable these days, but we must acknowledge that there is a significant portion of our population who perceives this. Let's also acknowledge the garnering of power and influence with respect to, for example, the presidency of the United States. We have a lineup of presidents who do not reflect the diversity of race, if you will, in our United States. And I think that is problematic. I think that is something that we must acknowledge. So this is just the start, garnering of power and influence. And I think it's something that sort of plays out in a variety of so many different aspects of power and influence. Let's also acknowledge garnering of power and influence through education, through instruction, starting with our textbooks, K through 12 in the United States. Carol Wilson wrote an article, Freedom at Risk, the Kidnapping of Free Black Slaves in America. Reading this article and other such articles remind me nothing of what I read in the history books. For example, the history books taught me in my kindergarten through 12th grade experience that Abraham Lincoln, because of his moral code, decided that slavery should be, we should end slavery. This is not the case if we read the true history, and a history that often we describe as being whitewashed in kindergarten through 12th grade education here in the United States. Let's also acknowledge the establishment of an ideology. This is something that I think personally believe that has played a heavy role in the race, the struggles that we have in our race, between races in our US society today. Because there is an ideology that has been intentionally established over the years that is sort of feeding this fire. Let's start with a clip from Gone with the Wind. And as you watch this clip, I want you to think about the producers and all of those involved in putting this before the American public and really the worldwide public to tell us that the white female is genteel, she is sweet, and she is beautiful. And the black female, for example, is ugly, she is asexual, she is hard. Let's play this video, please.
Miss Scarlett, where are you going without your shawl and the night air fixing to set in? And how come you didn't ask them gentlemen to stay for supper? You ain't got no more manners than a field hand. After me and Miss Helen done labored with you. Miss Scarlett, come on in the house. Come on in before you catch your death of dampness.
I think that's enough to sort of see what the intent was in that video clip. Here's another, and I just wanted to show one more just to remind you that these are so easily discovered and found and threaded throughout our society, particularly television, media, and all forms of media. Let's play.
Excuse me, boss.
Hey, Saratoga.
Yes, sir.
Isn't that my tie you got on?
Yes, sir.
And my shirt?
Yes, sir.
What are you doing with my belt?
You don't want your pants to fall down, do you, boss?
I'll talk to you later.
Yes, sir.
So we can see the wide eyes, for example. Nobody does that. We're human beings. It's not something that is a part of our humanity, but this is done intentionally to establish an ideology and to tell us what we are, even though as we move throughout society, that stands in stark contrast in so many ways. And I will also argue that this establishment has been received by both sides, I would argue, those who are trying to establish this ideology and those who are the victims, those who are the benefactors and those who are the victims. Let's move forward. I would also like to acknowledge the manifestation of racist ideology. So let's talk about in music, for example. You may notice the artist on the left-hand side in the image is Ice Cube, is his stage name. But I would like to remind you that he belonged as a teenager, and I repeat, teenager, to NWA, and N is the infamous N word that we're familiar with. and W is with and A is attitudes. So think about these lyrics, and I want to pause here for a minute, just briefly, so that you can read through the lyrics coming from teenagers growing up in Compton, California. So there is a thinking here. There is an experience here that we cannot deny. We have to acknowledge that we have teenagers who have now perceived the police as the bad guy or the opposition. We have a real problem here that we must acknowledge, because a teenager has nothing to gain by generating this type of information and presenting it in an art form. It's a passion, it's an experience that that person or those persons have lived that they're trying to share. And I would go so far as to say, I remember visiting a piano bar when I was in Texas and enjoying the music, had never been to a piano bar before, but I didn't know most of the songs. And someone said, "Where have you been all your life?" And the truth is, I hadn't been in white America all my life because I'm a Black female. I've been in the segregated, honestly, South. Even growing up in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, honestly, this is where I've been. So this kind of music was familiar to me. Not that I'm interested or have any interest in this kind of music necessarily, but it was familiar to me. And so many other different genres of music, because we have to acknowledge that we have that division. And it's very real, and it manifests in so many ways. Let's also acknowledge the manifestation of racist ideology. This one, I wasn't sure if it really belonged here or if it belonged in the garnering of power. But we have Judge Sherwood Chip Bauer Jr., who is notorious for differentiating the sentencing. Here we can see of convicted criminals. Here we can see the young man, 19 years of age, who is the white male, and the young man, 21 years of age, who is the Black male, both with very similar facts in their cases. One sentenced to county for 2 years and the other sentenced to state for 26 years. So we're talking about a very different reality that we must acknowledge. When the young man on the left gets out of prison, or gets out of jail, I should correct, he has an opportunity for education, to start over, to get married, have a family. By the time the gentleman on the right-hand side is out of prison, he is now institutionalized. So I'm not arguing that one should have gotten the other sentence or vice versa, but the point is we need to acknowledge the manifestation of some of what we've done with this racist ideology. Let's also acknowledge the manifestation of racist ideology in how it plays out. We kind of have a culture, what you may have heard here in the United States, called the Karens of the world. Persons calling the police on Black people, for example, for just doing what they say, what we call mundane things. This is sort of just regular language today. And so we have a Harvard University professor who's an upstanding citizen of society, who someone called the police on him because they perceived him as breaking into a home, happened to be his very own home that he was entering. Beyond that, this escalated to an arrest and a processing. And so we have to ask ourselves and figure out, what is it that we need to acknowledge here, that someone going into their own home can be arrested and questioned. There's so many things to acknowledge regarding prevalent imagery throughout our society. So as a person who has grown up just seeing this and being not the benefactor, I should say, a Confederate flag, as you notice on the left. I know there's a lot of discussion and debate about the Confederate flag, but there's nothing about this flag that would ever speak unity to me, because flags in and of themselves are about unity. And so uniting around the Confederacy that believes that human beings should be likened into animals and should be free labor on their back should be had, I cannot unite or appreciate anything about the Confederacy or the flag that represents the unity about it. Also, the statue. There's also a current debate here in the United States about what are we going to do with the statue of Lincoln and the slave. I don't know if the statue should stay. I don't know if the statue should go. I've never seen it in person, but if I were to encounter it, there's nothing about it that says anything positive and that supports or encourages me. And so I cannot appreciate or approve it. Also, the news article about Johnny Cash's Negro wife. He was exposed, even though his wife did not, she's deceased now, did not identify as a Black female. Her family are white. Just in a bad picture, she could potentially look like, as I mentioned before, her hair might fall up. And so this becomes a crime. There are so much imagery. There is so much imagery just threaded throughout our society. Martin Luther King Jr. drives are only present in very low income neighborhoods that I've ever seen. These are messages and subliminal messages that are trying to teach me something that I hope I'm getting stronger and learning not to receive. For they have sown the wind and they shall reap the whirlwind. The prophet Hosea. Here in the United States, I would argue that we have sown the wind with all of this garnering of power, manifestation of ideology, and all of these things. And now we are seeing the blowback from that. So let's acknowledge reaping season. Some may refer to it as cancel culture, but coming from a certain perspective, canceling John Wayne movies, maybe they should be canceled, maybe they should not be canceled. I don't necessarily know. But when I sit down before a John Wayne movie, or if I watch something hailing John Wayne as a great hero and an icon of acting, I really just am reminded of a person who tried to take the Native American image and bring it down to a level of lower than humanity. And when I think of the Aunt Jemima pancake syrup, I remember being on the phone with a customer and being referred to as Aunt Jemima as a means to reduce me or as a means to target my confidence. I remember watching Gone with the Wind or trying to watch it, never actually getting through it, as you saw the clip from earlier, and having that message sent to me, telling me who I am. I remember the sitcom Friends, where I know that the producers on purpose hired only white male and female because they chose not to hire persons from other people groups. I remember hearing Allison Morris say the Los Angeles, whatever she said, I don't know, but coming from my background, I'm inclined to believe she probably has an ideology. I remember discovering governors from blackface and celebrating blackface, old racist tweets, code language, the Dems. There's so much language out there that is code language for this division. I think it's important to acknowledge this, and I hope that it can be considered going forward. And a quote from the book regarding persons arriving at a historically Black college. We shared experiences of disproportionate wages, unfair followings in retail stores, suspicious traffic stops, hecklings in crowds, questionable housing and employment practices, and many other nightmares that have gone largely unexplained in American society. So I would say that many times I could walk into my home where the family is a Black family and we share experiences, or I could walk into an event or a place where most people there are Black, and we will share experiences of all of these things described here and even more. Please know that we are only scratching the surface here today. Next slide, please. And lastly, I would argue the need for ownership. Sometimes we just won't acknowledge, and this goes for all of us. And then in the end, we potentially are embarrassed. For example, Starbucks, had they acknowledged in the beginning that this was a problem, they wouldn't need the apology statement that honestly falls flat. This is not who we are. Papa John's, exposed. We condemn racism in all forms. Jimmy John's, we have zero tolerance for racism. well, this may or may not be true, but I don't perceive that this is actually the right way to go, being reactive rather than proactive. And last but not least, I just have a great hope for the next generation. You can play the video.
Okay, Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I'm very moved, and just hearing personal experiences for me is so important, and I hope that you guys have all found that to be the case for you as well. We're going to transition a little bit and think about some action steps. What can we do as whatever position that you're coming from to grow in our knowledge and take steps that are going to be proper for us? So I want to say that I understand that all of us are coming from different positions. I am a white woman in the South. I have been taught and raised my entire life as a teacher and in my position in the South that I should be apolitical, kind of like line your lips and keep them closed, ideal. And so that's the position I'm coming from, and that I am so glad to be able to be stepping out and spending the last several years of my life, thanks to other educators in my own life. But I know that we're all coming from a different perspective, and I hope that you can find that some of these action steps are going to spin your own wheels and help you make your own knowledge and a growth. So this is a really great image for me that I try to always share with my students. We have to learn, I believe, as educators specifically, to think about the information that we're receiving. Just because it comes from a news source, it doesn't mean that it's always accurate. We need to decode that information. And if we don't understand where that news source leans on the political realm, then we really don't have the ability to decode that information. And so just reverting back and looking back at a visual like this can be really helpful for us to think about decoding the information that we ingest ourselves and that we also provide to our students. So here are some specific things that we would like to share with you guys, some resources. Again, we know that this list is not exhaustive. These are just some talking points and some ideas. Everyday Anti-Racism is an edited book, so you get lots of different voices, and I really love that. They address the idea of what is racist, what is racist as in the education system, and then how can we discuss that as an educator among our colleagues, with our students, in our community? What do we do? Born Out of Struggle is Stovall, and what he does is he applies the critical race theory that Natalie talked about, that she talks about in her chapter, into real life school settings and how we can engage with our community, and not just theoretical information, but utilizing that information in our everyday lives. So moving past theory, which people like myself in higher ed, we tend to lean on a little bit too much. We included number 3, white fragility, even though we hear and we acknowledge the pushback on this sort of book, right? Written by a white woman. We acknowledge that many of the things in the book may be sugar-coated. But what we also want to say is that it is an opening, a first step for some people, right? And we all have to take that first step. And so we think that that could be an important first step. Black Like Me is something that Heather and I both taught. We're both former high school and middle school English teachers. Black Like Me is from 1961 and details someone going into the South and the different treatment they received when they presented themselves as a white man or an African-American man. About Race is a really great podcast that really just answers the questions and pushed me as a white woman to really acknowledge some things that I do and the privileges that I have. I'm sure that most of us used to have a commute. We are currently not commuting, but if you are, it's a great way to spend your time learning. I utilize podcasts now as a walker, and I'm so excited that we get to use some of those podcasts that Ryan and Wallace shared with us earlier. And then last is our own book, Hear My Voice. And again, Natalie's chapter is extremely important. As Natalie mentioned, we also have a chapter in there that shares a narrative from an immigration standpoint and a student who is facing deportation. Media recommendations, especially for me as a teacher educator, I believe that utilizing media is useful and important. 13th is a documentary that's available on Netflix, and it really talks about the school to prison pipeline that we have. And as educators, we must acknowledge that this exists. Black students, particularly Black males, are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school. And when they have that sort of encounter in the school system, they're much more likely to be a part of the juvenile system as well. And we have to acknowledge and think about zero tolerance policies and the way that we discipline in a school system. Eyes on the Prize was produced by PBS, and it details civil rights movements and events all the way into the 1980s. I am a former history teacher, so I believe that we cannot really understand, right, unless we understand the history, and we've got to start there, and that's really important for us to understand and to move forward. Implicit Project is a wonderful project that was produced and developed by Harvard. You can go to their website, and on this website, they have multiple quizzes in which you can take, and it will identify implicit biases that you live with, that you have in your own life. And again, echoing what Heather and Natalie have already said, we all have biases. That's the number 1 step. And number 2 is identifying those so that we can counteract and work against them. My students, when they utilize this program or these quizzes, it always makes for very interesting conversations. Some aren't willing to share the results. They're embarrassed by the results, but it's a really good way for us to engage and talk about what's going on underneath the surface. Oh my goodness, there are so many social media recommendations that I want to make, but the one thing that I want to say is that I encourage all of us to expand our circle, to expand your circle. And we live in a time where technology enables us to do that. Though I may live in a community and work in a place where most of the people look like me or have similar backgrounds to me, I can expand my circle through social media. So My Reflection Matters is an Instagram account that provides products and information that enables Black and brown students to see themselves. And as educators, we need to be putting those products and that information into every classroom and every system. Here We Read is the same concept. She just focuses a little bit more on our K through 6 books. Teaching While Muslim is both a social media and a blog. She has multiple resources and webinars and workshops for teachers that they can go to. Again, tons of Twitter accounts that enable us to expand our knowledge and to understand just being exposed to other ideas, other thoughts, and what can we do as educators, I think is extremely important. So again, man, that was fast and furious. And it was a really short list, but we believe that this conversation is important and that there are so many people and resources that show that we should add to our own list and that you probably know that I don't know. And so we want, even if we don't have time or we have limited time for that conversation today, we want to keep that conversation going with you all. I want to expand my own personal learning network. And so here is our contact information. We have our emails and our Twitter accounts for you guys to follow and interact with us.